So I write a lot of poems about the difficulty of language and the limits of language. I'm very fascinated by how inadequate language is to experience. We really can't put into words so much of what we feel and experience. And I actually love that about language. I love the frailty of language and the kind of humanness and brokenness of it. And I'm fascinated by working with these very broken tools to try to make something that points at the moon, which is about as good as you can get with language. So I write a lot about that struggle, and I'm going to recite a couple poems that are have something to do with that, about the limits of language. And the first one is ironically titled Untitled. It's so difficult to get to the true expression, the one language we would speak all day if we had time. We live our lives in fragmentary sentences, always unfinished. Untranslatable text, resisting description, dangling modifiers, verbless syntax. We search for the active principle, what makes our life go. Meanwhile, the landscape is as placid as it ever was. Stark pines held quiet against a pale sky. Dark outlines of pale oaks and maples making the same continuous music day after day, unconcerned. And the river moving forward inexorably, whether it rains or snows, a rattling, disjunctive harmony over rocks. Even the buildings are calm and implacable. Even the light, constantly changing, has a smooth, a glassy certainty. It can't be shaken. Only our hearts and bodies get caught in this perpetual tumult, this motion picture whose frames slip past, reeling out of control with the clack, clack, clack that comes at the end of the roll. How painful it is to be human, to have taken this form in this life. Always succumbing to the slow undertow, nothing certain but change itself. Never able to really give form to our feelings, always coming up short against the comma and the semicolon, the abrupt, uncertain ending. Our blood is over everything, our scent and sex. We'd own it if we could, all of it, glowing with the earth's enchantments, fading fast in this perennial disrobing, an agony of content and discontent. Yet while we're here, we seem to fall in love with all of it. And the next one is called The Limits of Language. I wrote it a few months ago. And I memorized it a few days ago, so we'll see. We'll see if I make it good. The Limits of Language. I feel a sharp pain inside where language limits me, where I come to the end of its jeweled brilliance and there is no more. The saying stops, but experience continues, far beyond the bright flicker of words, the dancing variations. All the uncontained out there, like a vast lake, reflective and blue and unstoppable, laughing at the limited, its paler shadows, these inky marks, shuttered sounds, the shapes our mouths would make. No matter how we shape the words, no matter how we carve the forms, one kiss undoes them all with its infinity of sensations, exploding through the body's nerve canals. The unlocatable heart, its unnameable tremors and undulations, The brain's pure, strange sine waves and urgent semaphores, signaling meanings housed so deep in the body's library of memories, soul's caverns of skulls that we'll never know why we're ready to pledge our lives just to dive once more into the reckless, incandescent darkness of touch. Except it holds what our speech cannot, a taste of the infinite, the ache and pulse of being, the sun coming up inside the flower, the world born anew each morning. We'll never grasp it with our words, the exact shade and shimmer of new light after a storm, like the wetness and newness after making love. Or we'll touch it and touch again like an obsessive lover, fingering the locks that open to a world of fire and sharp song, an annihilation we crave but never quite find in the rigid troops marching across the page. No matter how we get them drunk and make them dance, no matter how we refigure the 26 permutations of the alphabet into a flux, a wreckage, a monument to the changeless, the wasted, the gathering hues, and we thrust them heavenward, watch them fall back, as they inevitably will, into our small hands. We crush them, the letters, for the juice running red and purple through our fingers, staining us indelibly, the river in our veins. It's not the same, the poem, the word. It doesn't connect the infinite dots. But oh, how we love to try. This is another one inspired by another poet, Mark Doty, who's a big inspiration for me. He's a gay man who lives in Provincetown, Mass., which is a small, very quaint seaside town with a large gay population. And he wrote a couple of amazing books of poetry and a memoir during and after the time his longtime companion died of AIDS. And if you've ever known someone dying of AIDS, it's a long, brutal process. And he continued to write throughout it, not only when his lover was dying, but half of his friends as well, because it was during the AIDS epidemic, the height of the epidemic. And in Provincetown, it was like every second person was dying. And I heard him read from his poems and his memoir and give an interview after he read from this incredibly wrenching memoir about his lover dying. And the interviewer asked him, you know, where do you find yourself in your life now? What are your visions for the future? What do you want? And Mark Doty answered with just a single word. He said, more. And I was so blown away by the courage and love in that answer. I mean, it really rocked me to the core that someone who had been through that was their response. And so I wrote this poem for him, and it's called Another Dose of Pleasure for Mark Doty. I have to remember how it begins. Okay. Ravaged by grief and loss, by losing, he nursed his lover through the diminishing hours as once cherished faculties, loved pastimes were stripped away. And life revealed itself to be what it is, perilous, tragic, perplexing, inconstant, unspeakably beautiful. As friends and lovers dropped around him in startling numbers, in the same hideous, unstoppable plummet toward death or toward bereavement. Those were the choices then. He watched and wrote, refusing to be silenced. As the sea corroded the dunes, and the dunes in answer broke out in resplendent bloom. As storms trashed the harbor, the seaside town, then left it glittering, somehow more radiant in the morning light. Tell me where it ends, he wrote, observing how the fog blurs the line between sand and sea, observing how the edge of death is made hazy by love. And when it had all been taken, burnt, hollowed out, and he woke and saw the sea still shimmering, the sky an unrepentant blue, he rose and asked for just one thing, more. Today's dark hours cave and crash toward midnight, and I am their refuge and harbor master. So even if I don't know what my true station is, if sometimes I stand stuck in the shallows, feet marrying dark water, what of it? This too is our life. We take it on and wear it just the same, ragged kimono of glittering threads, old bedspread, trustworthy sheath and companion. And we love it, isn't it so? Our own peculiarities as familiar and warm to us as bread, as smooth stones rubbed long between our hard hands. How could we not take what's given, all of it, swallow it whole, greedy for more? Another dose of pain, please. Another dose of pleasure. Thank you. Oh. Back when I was living in Berkeley, which is many years ago now, I read an interview with the African-American poet Yusef Komunyakaa, a wonderful poet, Vietnam vet. And he was saying in this interview, he was talking about how all our images for blackness and darkness, all our metaphors are negative, and what that's like for a black person. And he was speaking about the need for us to praise darkness. And when I read it, I was so struck by it. And I just felt like he's right. We need to praise the darkness. And what I felt was we need to remember the positive images like fertile soil and the womb and the cave and mystery. But we also need to not turn away from the shadow side, death, madness, the things that we often try to blot out in this culture. And I feel like because we blot them out, they become monsters. Death becomes weapons of mass destruction because we won't look at it in this culture. So I wanted to write a poem that praised all those aspects of darkness, the so-called positive and negative. And so this poem was born out of that. And it's called Praising Darkness. Feel your hand at the edge, open the light. Fracture molecules, hair's breadth, evangelical, to root out what's wealthy, savvy, raven, rank. Thumbnail sketch by midnight's light, fertile ground, inky ooze and sweet obscurity, twilight fall and revelation. Heart weight, blanket, deafening, despair. We've got to sing the madness, the dark sisters flaring up the way only black gleams. Soil bed and shadow self and a wandering people. Absence, thick origin, lazy, soulful night. Lover's haunt, whisper realm, imagination's tongue, and sweet singing between the stars. Hallelujah. Brother and sister. Moon, mystery, modeled language. Hallelujah.